is, I think we must change the program and invite our friend Giuseppe Vitiello from Eblida, because he has some strict schedule to start our discussion today. Mr. Vitiello, let me give you some biographic has been a director Eblida since 2019. From 1989 to 2018, he served as head of unit, program advisor and expert in various international organizations, European Commission, Council of Europe, ISSN International Center, EU ISS and NATO Defense College. Earlier in his career, he acted as head research and development, National Library in Florence, and lectured at the Universities of Orleans and Toulouse. He also held visiting positions at the Hochschule der Medien in Stuttgart and the University of Venice. With a master in political science, international relations, he has postgraduate diplomas in history from Paris and in Library Science School of Administration from Rome. He's the author of 6 books and more than 100 articles in library and information science and history of culture. Giuseppe, the step is yours.
Thank you very much for leaving the floor. Next time I will provide a shorter bio so you won't be bothered with all this information. Thank you very much for having invited me. I know that I'm fully aware that the Thessaloniki Book Fair is the international book fair in Greece, and therefore it's I'm really welcome this opportunity of presenting the work that Eblida has been doing in this field. Eblida is the European Bureau of Library Information Documentation Associations. It has 130 members. They are in 32 member states. And our main mission is to work for sustainable development. We have carried out several reports, and also we have tools that facilitate projects, SDG-oriented projects in libraries. We have worked on library legislation and policy, and I'm really happy to inform you that last month, exactly 1 month ago, the Council of Europe approved a recommendation, a Council of Europe Eblida recommendation on library legislation and policy in Europe. And I really hope that these recommendations are going to shape and to renew. Finally, our third strand concerns e-lending. The approach that was chosen by Eblida is not an approach, is a legal approach. We have found out that actually this is a complex approach, and it was very much oriented towards British American publishing, and this is easy to explain. I mean, the British American publishing houses started to publish e-books, and therefore there was a market for e-lending. And then the discussion, very often the legal that was focused on the Anglo-Saxon market. We wanted to have a different kind of approach, and so we started to explore, to inquire about the conditions of the e-lending in Europe. And we also found out that actually they are quite different from the Anglo-Saxon world. Of course, there are disparities in Europe. For instance, in Greece, e-books are in a budding phase, which is not the case in the Netherlands or in Nordic countries or in Germany, but also in Italy, for instance. And there are different requirements. So in, let's say, 10 minutes, I will try to summarize the result of this investigation. which of course you find on the website and under the section applications. First, we wanted to analyze quantitative aspects of ebooks and we found of e-lending, and we found out actually that there is a quite minimal level of e-lending in Europe in relation to traditional lending. Probably Denmark is the most successful country in Europe in providing e-lending issue, but even in the most successful country, e-lending transactions are 3.5 times less than traditional lending. So let's say for one e-lending transaction, there are 3.5 lending transactions. This is Denmark. As I say, it's probably the most successful country. But also, let's say, in Norway or in Finland, so in other Nordic countries, the level of e-lending is quite minimal because it is the relation is more or less 1 to 10. And if we go then to other countries, there is an increase of gap between traditional lending and e-lending. In Germany, it's 25 times less. And in France, I mean, if you take France, it's 400 times less. So let's say there are reasons for publishers, or not, at least it's what we think. There are reasons for publishing houses not to be concerned about developments in e-lending in Europe. The second issue we wanted to explore was whether the level of e-lending could be an incentive to digital literacy. And in fact, we also found out that digital literacy, and these are official Eurostat statistics of digital literacy, is actually quite minimal in Europe as well. Of course, you can say that in the northern countries, this is not the case, because digital literacy in Nordic countries reaches levels of 70–80%. But even in countries which are supposed to have a quite good development of digital infrastructure, like France and Germany, actually, the level of digital literacy is quite low. It can be 60%. And in other countries, like Italy and Greece, it's even less, so it's less than 50%. And so you may wonder, how can you increase digital literacy all over Europe if the number of e-lending transactions is so low? So these were the two main questions, and I now focus on some small details which may be, however, interesting for countries which are starting business in this field. One thing is, should there be a national digital lending agency, or there should be more, or there should be, and if there is a national lending agency, how should it be formed? What kind of composition should be on what kind of composition should be based this national lending e-lending agency? Then we found out that in Europe there are several models. On the one hand, for instance, in Nordic countries, there may be a model which is a state model. In Finland, for instance, the National Digital Lending e-lending agency is an association of actually state funded, and so they more or less they set the rules and they also negotiate with publishers. So this is a model. There is another model which is slightly, and this is also a model in Norway, where the National Library actually took the lead. Although in Norway there are two agencies, delivering services, e-lending services. So it's, let's say, in Norway, you can choose between two actors. In Denmark, actually, which is, as I say, the most successful agency, in Denmark there is a different model, and it is the association of municipalities that are funding the national e-lending agency. And this is also another interesting model. Then in France, it's totally in the hands of publishers. There is a subsidiary, there is a branch, let's say, of the Publishers Association that has created a model. In Spain, there is no national e-lending agency. In Italy and Germany, it's an intermediary, so it's a neutral actor, let's say, who creates the mediation between publishers and libraries. So what I'm going to conclude, and I'm really going to the conclusions of this short summary of the report, and all the information and data, and also models, and also recommendations. They are included on the Eblida website. We can say that and this is a recommendation, of course, that I would say for Greece, publishers, you can embark upon e-lending without concern, because I mean, you have to experiment how it is working. And I would say, for the moment, really do not have these legal concerns. First create the situation, and then you create the concern. Then the second is, I think that, I mean, we believe that e-lending is really fundamental for the development of digital literacy in Europe. And then third recommendation, try to choose a national agency. I mean, the need for a national agency is quite obvious. There is a good rationale for creating a national e-lending agencies. There are savings, there is a centralization of e-lending transactions. So it's quite, it may be an interesting model. So try to choose, let's say, a national e-lending agencies which fit your needs. And so with these words that I hope are opening a discussion on what kind of national e-lending agencies, what kind of concerns there could be in Greece, I would like to leave the floor to the next speaker, and thank you very much for having invited me.
Thank you, Giuseppe, for your fruitful comments and information. The second speaker is Matt Voigts from IFLA. He comes from the States, but he lives in the Netherlands. He's member of the headquarters staff of IFLA. Matt, the step is yours. If you like to present yourself more, please do it now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll share my screen and do a traditional PowerPoint here. Yes, well, thank you. Thank you all very much for having me here. I thought in this talk I'd give a bit of an overview about different digital lending projects and modes of digital lending and how they fit into the mission of libraries and libraries' traditional concerns. For a bit of background on me, I have a PhD. It's a multidisciplinary PhD, but I consider myself an anthropologist by background, so I specialize in connecting larger ideas to what happens on the ground. At IFLA, I do a bit of research on copyright-related topics as a part of the Copyright and Other Legal Matters Committee at IFLA, and a lot of my work is international advocacy for libraries and for copyright laws that work for libraries in international forums, particularly at the World Intellectual Property Organization in Geneva. So for a bit of some background on what I've observed on digital lending, for one, COVID was a point where it really forced this out into the open very quickly for a lot of different institutions. When physical spaces closed down and patrons, when students wanted wanted content, digital became the obvious way to kind of deliver that. And I'm thankful to Eblida for the stats as well on the specifics of where lending is popular and where it's not as popular in Europe. What we found is that generally that the closer you get to kind of the archetype of the commercial English language recently available content, it has greater availability. But of course, there are a lot of issues for libraries there that are widely known in the library community. Licenses are expensive for libraries to get this content, exponentially more than for private consumers, and much more restrictive than private consumers. Limited to certain periods of time, limited to certain numbers of checkouts. And this is the material that's available through these formats. It's much more recent, it's much more commercial material. And the further you get away from that, the further you get away from the English language, the further you get away from recent material, the bigger challenges you have through finding a purchasable digital copy of that, which is where projects like the Hathi Trust, where the Internet Archive, where these controlled digital lending and different digitization projects have come in. When it's not available and patrons want to work, that's when these projects start to become, they fill a need. And also these digitization formats, it poses challenges for libraries' traditional projects with preservation and curation, because we may not like to think about our own mortality, but all of our works will eventually become orphan works. We'll lose control of the capacity to, they'll go out there into the world. And this is where libraries have traditionally played a very important function to say, all right, here's where we've collected these works, here's where we've created these works. When this is no longer quite as easy to access immediately commercially, here we have the books and here we can circulate the books. And if we want the books to be accessible at that point, then this is where it is important for libraries to have flexibility to get that material in a variety of different capacities. As a project, as a sort of project to encourage the diversity of material and the local availability of some of this content, I would like to mention that there are some libraries in the States who have experimented with local music curation, where they've launched their own streaming services for that kind of content, where they pay local artists, they make the local collections, they curate it, and they do the preservation there. A lot of, if you're interested in the specifics of more digitization, we're a part of a project with IFLA called Knowledge Rights 21. We've done a number of webinars there on some of the more technical aspects of digital lending and some of the legal aspects. There's also a number of position papers that they've written about the different logics of how digital lending, how digitization fits into things. And I'm also drawing from reports that I wrote at IFLA on how well copyright law served libraries during COVID-19 and copyright issues with cross-border preservation projects. So the kinds of challenges that come up when you're having to work with digital material like this for a library include that if it's this new digital material, the question is a lot about you're trusting the sort of database aspects, the sort of curation aspects of the offerings from publishers. And again, for reasons I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of challenges associated with that, both the cost and with the selection available. For older material, the questions come up around legal aspects of, well, how can we actually work with this? I mean, what will happen is a library has a collection of older material and they want to make it more widely available, and they want to make sure it's preserved. And if it's a certain age, if it's from like the 1920s, okay, it's probably public domain. Digitize that, put it online. But what happens when it's from the 60s or from the 70s? It's getting into this kind of gray area where the legal rules are less clear. And the clearer you make those laws around digitization and what you can do with that material, the better opportunity there is to preserve that and to make it available. The other challenge associated with that is the infrastructure that's required for that. Because if you're having to make legal calls on that, if you're having to make practical calls, you may be, whatever the size of your institution, you may be trusting to even larger scale collaborators. And you're trusting their technical infrastructure and you're trusting their legal calls. One library that I talked to about this said that they would try to contact their other partners and say, look, we have people that know our material and they say that it should be public domain, it should be open and available, but we can't necessarily communicate with our partners because for them it's just a larger amount of material there. The other part where this really comes up is in post-colonial contexts, where you have material which is distributed across countries that have historic relations, such as like between Aruba and the Netherlands, where collections about the island or material that's about that are, some of it's held locally, but some of it's held back in the Netherlands. You're working across languages, you're working across legal systems, and if the material is held locally, that's a small enough environment where people can go and find the rights holders, they can find the descendants of rights holders, they can work out what are the wishes of people. But the further you disperse that, the more challenging it is for people in a local environment to find material that is relevant to them. Again, digitization, digital distribution, very important, lots of opportunities here. The other thing is, it was mentioned here, open access. Since I started my PhD in 2014, and even before that, in my undergrad and master's, open access was something which was talked about and kind of utilized, but the more that I go to international conferences, particularly as I get out of Europe, open access is simply the norm. In America, in Europe, open access, there's increasing requirements, of course, for academics to publish in that way with publicly funded material, but also outside of that, it's simply the way that you get your material distributed, it's the way that you get it read. So that has increasingly become the norm in academia. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you too, Matt. Thank you. Please stay with us in order to advance the discussion later on.
Of course, of course.
Next speaker is Jennie Rose Halperin from Library Futures, an American organization. Let me give you some CV details for Halperin. Mrs. Halperin, she's a digital strategist, community builder, and librarian who serves as director of Library Futures. She's focused on growing the organization and its reach and fostering a culture of open, inclusive leadership to support equitable library policy, technology, and advocacy. Jennie joins Library Futures from Harvard Law School Library, where she served as the assistant director for outreach and community engagement. Previously, she managed communications for Creative Commons and worked on growth and community at O'Reilly Media and Mozilla. A committed civic leader, in 2018, she was chosen for Boston Mayor Marty Walsh's Spark Cohort for Millennial Leaders and received a new Urban Mechanics Public Space Invitational Grant in 2019. In 2021, she was named a visionary by Public Knowledge, a future leader who will drive tech policy in the public interest for the next 20 years. Jennie was on the Community Advisory Board for Invest in Open Infrastructure and has completed the Coaching Fellowship, Outreach, and the CBO Exchange for Young Professionals in Germany. Jennie received her MLS from University of North Carolina and Chapel Hill and as a Carolina Academic Library Associate, and her BA from Barnard College of Columbia University. I think if I
so much for your kind introduction. Again, my name is Jennie Rose Halperin. I'm the Director of Library Futures at the NYU Engelberg Center. I am going to share my slides. Oh. There we go. My talk is titled The End of Ownership. Again, I'm Jennie Rose Halperin from Library Futures. We joined the NYU Engelberg Center back in August. I'll tell you a little bit about that as well. My background is as a librarian, but also in digital publishing. And also I worked at Creative Commons for quite a while. Actually, I have two screens up, so I'm just gonna have to do both. So I'm just gonna start with a tiny little bit about what Library Futures is. Library Futures is a think tank for the future of libraries. We are innovative and proactive, tackling cutting-edge issues around technology and access to information that other library organizations might be slow to address. We identify and address digital rights issues within libraries and access to information, mobilizing a community of experts through research, policy and advocacy, education, special projects, and programmatic interventions that seek to encourage the adoption of technologies that uplift libraries in the digital age. And you can see these are some of our pictures of some things that we've done together in the past few years. Again, we're about 2 years old and are very excited to now be part of the Engelberg Center on Innovation, Law, and Policy. Through our institutional affiliation, we are uniquely positioned to amplify our impact by further engaging with legal experts, information scholars, libraries, and other institutions. We are in some pretty sassy t-shirts that I'll be talking a little bit about. RELX, Read Elsevier LexisNexis. In this talk, but we made some t-shirts that said RELX, don't do it, for Sarah Lambdin's book Data Cartels a few months ago, which is where the majority of this talk is actually drawn from. So we work in 4 spaces, which are research, education, policy and advocacy, and special projects. You can check out our website, but I won't take up too much more time with organizational stuff. So I'm going to start with a quote from Sarah Lambdin's book, Data Cartels, which just came out from Stanford University Press. So Elsevier treats academic research not like a publicly funded resource, but like its own private portfolio of copyright assets. So I'm also going to just say, even though I worked at Creative Commons for a while, Library Futures works more generally on issues of library access. And so the kinds of sort of solutions that I'm going to propose are very much based in library solutions rather than specifically academic solutions. And I'm also going to apologize ahead of time because I see this as a very international audience, that a lot of the policy solutions that I go into at the end of this talk are a little bit US based. So we can maybe have a conversation about more international approaches to these issues. And you can kind of substitute Elsevier in this sentence with many academic publishing companies, particularly data analytics companies. I saw today, for example, that Elsevier now claims that 50% of their revenue comes from data analytics and metrics rather than from academic publishing. And they have a number of different kinds of technologies and sort of risk analysis technologies that some of them touch the academic market and some of them don't. So let's start with something a little bit interactive. So where does Elsevier and other academic publishers profit? I'm going to encourage everybody to drop in the chat some of your ideas of what are the sort of touch points or networks or nodes where Elsevier or another academic publisher might profit. So I can start as just an example. They hold copyright on materials. Let's see if we can get a couple in. Subscriptions, perfect. Publication fees, APCs, article processing Charges for open access, that's totally right on. Registration fees. Citation software is one that I think a lot of people don't think about, like Crossref. Licenses, embargoes, bundling fees, impact metrics, selling data, absolutely. Individual article fees, licenses, totally right. These are all great. You can keep dropping them in. I think we got the majority of them. Advertising. So it's 80+ million articles are locked behind paywalls, which constitutes about 75% of academic research. And so I made, this is really ugly and I apologize if you can see it. So I made what's called the oligopoly octopus of the different touch points that that academic publishers are touching. So we have at its head, because I ran out of arms, and it's kind of the brain that drives all of it, is you get the software and the databases and the indexing. You have one arm is data analytics, input and payment, output and findings, copyright, impact factor, and then you have other academic products. And when I put this out on social media and said, what did I forget? People said, all the other pieces of risk analysis and data analytics software that these companies control. And so now I'm actually gonna sort of move forward. I didn't want to make this presentation so long because I'm sure that we're gonna have a really robust conversation. But so, you know, a lot of the questions around this, and the reason why I'm interested in bringing a very different kind of perspective to this have to do with the issues of first sale and fair use, which I admit is a very sort of North American, even US based concept. But there are other solutions that I'll go into that are not necessarily fair use based in the digital context. And the reason why I have a little shrugging face is, at least in the US, the courts kind of still aren't sure about how to treat first sale in the digital context. And what that means is that the majority of materials, of content that people work with are now licensed. And so, you know, universities are buying large subscriptions, but they're buying licensed content, which largely treats content and articles and academic information like software. So you don't actually own it. So I'm going to come in with a quote from a book called The End of Ownership by Jason Schultz and Aaron Perzanowski. When a library buys a physical book, it exhausts the copyright owner's interest in that particular copy. The library can subsequently lead it out sequentially to any number of patrons for as long as it likes, even to other libraries through processes such as an interlibrary loan. It can also repair the book, make a small number of archival copies, and resell or donate the book at any time, all without needing to ask permission or pay the copyright owner additional money. And so what we get is the situation in which sort of large academic metrics and risk analysis companies, for example, Reed Elsevier, LexisNexis, are controlling large amounts of library information that should be public. And so what Schultz and Perzanowski call this is a private regulatory scheme with restrictions. None of us really agreed to the system. It's just kind of happening. And it creates a EULA, an end user license agreement, as a mutant form of contract. It means that the way in which all of these processes are happening, particularly around licenses, is legally incomprehensible, because it is treating all content, and particularly publicly funded content and publicly funded academic information, as a rental or as a sort of a not owned attribute that's now owned by the publisher or private company. And so, so what it does is it's creating what they call a market for lemons. So just to give a couple more examples. So for example, one that people think of a lot is the Facebook terms of service. When you sign into Facebook, or I'm sure when we signed into Crowdcast today, we said, yeah, I agree to these terms. But if you actually sat down and read the Facebook terms of service, for example, it would take someone 72 days to read the fine print. You also get situations where, for example, Reed Elsevier LexisNexis is deeply involved with the American military and selling data to Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement, and sometimes sensitive immigration data as well. And there are many examples of library-based or collaborative-based solutions to this problem. And I'd actually really encourage folks, because I don't really know the MRI field that well, to drop some of the interesting collaborations that you've been doing or that you know about or that you're working on in your institutions or within your capacity as a researcher into the chat so that we can talk about them. And so the next part of sort of all of the different things, many of the different things, definitely not all of the different things, but many of the different policy solutions that could start to reform some of the issues within publication. These are in no particular order at all. But so the first could be that there could be greater enforcement of what's called digital first sale. So when you buy it, you own it. You have the rights and conferred to you within ownership to do what you will with it within the boundaries of copyright. So another could be more flexibility and clarity in fair use or fair dealing, particularly globally. There's been some talk at WIPO of creating a new sort of global fair use. This is a long shot, it's a bit high in the sky, but fair use is very powerful and could be very powerful globally. This one I really like is treating digital copyright like other property issues. So that means that much like you can create an easement on your physical property in order to kind of allow people to use it, is that you could create an easement for the public good. So yes, we have these, these companies who still might still own the copyright, but for the public interest, access is permitted as an easement because this information is, for example, or this material or this research is publicly funded, or it would, for example, with the COVID models, help speed up innovation in some way. Another is a much lax enforcement of copyright in academic settings. Everybody knows about Sci-Hub. Didn't need to be enforced, could be. This is another sort of solution that might be useful. Congressional action, at least in the US, Congress has a lot of power. They could take action on this issue. And some of the ways that they could do that is through antitrust enforcement, government intervention or FTC action on big deal bundling, anti-competitive practice and non-disclosure agreements. And in the US, we've started to see some of this happen. So the OSTP released a memo a few months ago that made it so that in 5 years, all publicly funded research in the United States will be made publicly available. And this was a huge step. It is non-binding, right? So there could be a stronger statement from the FTC. There could be stronger rules around this through congressional action. And then policy intervention in just the metrics and brokering issues, I think would also go a really long way. And then here are some more more global solutions. A lot of these come from our friends at Knowledge Rights 21, who are doing very similar work on copyright and ownership and digital ownership and library ownership in Europe. So rights retention is a very, very powerful tool. If you are a researcher and you are going to sign away your copyright to your publisher, maybe don't, right? Like there are ways to retain rights, and your university offices can work with you to retain your rights or to terminate your transfer of rights to the publisher. Controlled digital lending, or called secure digital lending in Europe, is something that we also work a lot on. It is also based on the concept of digital ownership, where if you buy one copy, then you can lend one copy and you can't lend more than one copy. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. Controlled digital lending, particularly in reserves and preprints and other more alternative ways of providing access, can also be very, very powerful. Another is protecting users' rights from contract override. So if you are a user, you also have certain numbers of rights. So this could also be sort of looked at from a user's perspective. If you're a university student, for example, and cannot get access to your materials, then your rights are being violated as a student, because if your institution can't afford it. And one way that they could is by using interlibrary loan, which is a very powerful tool, lending and digitizing and then lending out materials based on controlled digital lending one by one. And then the last is sort of what's similar in some ways to fair use or fair dealing in Europe, which is secondary publishing rights. So the ability to republish, for a researcher to republish their material on their own website, but all of this, or on their own repository, whatever. So all of these will sort of lead into this basis of secondary publishing rights. And this is a very broad overview, right? So we're just kind of going through all of the many of the different kinds of ideas without getting too deep into the trenches of all the different open access solutions, which I think our other speakers will do an incredible job reviewing. But these are just some policy solutions, and also some of the sort of state of where we're at in a very short presentation. And so I'm just going to end with this quote from Heather Joseph, the executive director of the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. People can still get access to resources with a card, but it is no longer with a library card or a student ID, it's with a credit card. And I think this idea is really powerful. It's something that, that I think a lot about, and the ways in which academic research has been monetized and very much has been taken out of the hands of the people and put into private companies. And again, not in all cases. And I'm really excited to hear from my fellow panelists about some of the ways that, particularly in the MRI field and in other fields, people are really subverting this very troubling trend. But I do think that there are regulatory solutions to these trends as well. And I think that they're very much in our hands. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Christian, to our moderator. Thank you so much. Feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I really look forward to a robust discussion.
Thank you very much. Now, τώρα προχωράμε σε μια ελληνική παρέμβαση του κυρίου Γιώργου Ανδρέα Ζάννου, που είναι διευθυντής στον ΟΣΔΕΛ. Και συνεχίζουμε. Κύριε Ζάννο.
Γεια σας. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για την πρόσκληση. I will continue in English so that also our foreign guests can follow my presentation. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to present our thoughts on e-lending from the side of authors and publishers. Together with me is also Anne Bergman-Tahon, who is the director of the Federation of European Publishers, and she is in Thessaloniki in order to visit the 90th Thessaloniki International Book Fair. And I was very glad that she accepted my proposal to join us, and also the hosts that also agree to that. So let me introduce first myself. I'm the director of ΟΣΔΕΛ, which is the collective management organization, and its mission is to administer and protect the rights of authors and publishers. ΟΣΔΕΛ is a non-profit organization. It's a cooperative, and it represents more than 8,000 writers and 1,200 publishers. One of the rights that right holders have entrusted ΟΣΔΕΛ is the right of public lending. Let me give you first a short overview of public lending of physical books in Greece. As you probably all know, public lending has been regulated by European Union laws as early as 1996 with the Directive 92/100, and which was reviewed in 2006 with the Directive 115/2006. The directives are recognizing the exclusive right of authors to control the public lending, but also give the option to member states to introduce an exception of the exclusive rights under the conditions that authors, at least authors, receive a fair remuneration. Despite the clear EU legislation, Greek authors and publishers have not received any remuneration all this year for the public lending of their works. And here we have a clear case of infringement of the EU legislation to the detriment of authors and publishers. The recent law of November 2022, which transposed the copyright directive in the digital single market, the Directive 790, is trying to resolve this issue by fixing the remuneration in the amount of 350,000 euros for all categories of right holders. But again, this payment is subject to the issuance of a joint ministerial decree, which still have not been issued. So in Greece, we still have not resolved the public lending of physical books. But let's turn to the main issue, which is e-lending, or lending of electronic books. E-books in Greece are having a very small share in the Greek market. Yesterday, we presented the book data of the last 10 years, and according to our books in print database, the new titles of e-book represent merely 9% of the total yearly book production. And in terms of revenue, the revenue from e-books is less than 1% of the total revenue in year 2020. A very recent development is the launching of audiobooks in the Greek market during the last 2 years, which is a very dynamic launch and looks more promising. Consequently, the lending of digital books may become relevant in Greece as well in the near future. Let me say straight from the beginning that our position is that lending of digital books is not the same as lending of physical books from different perspectives. First, the experience of the reader is not the same. In case of a physical book, the reader gets a used copy of a book. In case of e-book, the notion of used book or worn e-book does not exist. In case of physical book, the reader has to visit the library, order the book, and after reading it, he has to visit again the library in order to return it. Sometimes readers are not able to get the book they wish if it already has been lent out, and they have to register and in a waiting list. With the permission of copyright holders, this situation in ebooks could be different. In the case of physical books, the library has to replace the worn copy of the book after a certain number of lendings, which, if I'm correct, you know it better, it's after 26 usages of lendings. I read it in a review. Finally, the experience of readers, in case he is buying a book and in case of lending a book, is very similar in the case of streaming, is very similar. And in the case of streaming services, is almost identical. Is there any difference for a reader between accessing a streaming platform of audiobooks or accessing a library that lends online audiobooks? Of course not. Of course, the experience is identical, but with one major exception, of course. In the first case, the reader has to pay in order to have access, and in the second case, the access is free. From the point of view of the right holders, the difference is tremendous. In the first case, the authors and the publishers control their works and receive a return of their investment for creating and publishing the works. In the second case, even if a remuneration is paid under the regime of public lending legislation of physical books, in legislation, this typically represents a tiny fraction of the revenue from sale for both the authors and the publisher. Even before going to examine the impact of e-lending to the sales of ebooks or physical books, it is evidence that if e-lending is not controlled by the right holders, we face a failure of the aim of copyright. One of the main pillars of copyright is the principle that every author or right holder should control the usage of his works, and moreover that he should be adequately remunerated for every usage of his work, exactly through the control of his rights. The situation becomes more threatening when a new usage of a work has an impact on the normal exploitation of the work. It is obvious from the characteristics of e-lending that it tends to substitute the respective sales of digital books. This has been evidenced by various surveys that have been conducted in Sweden, Italy, France, and Germany by GfK, the German research company, on behalf of FEP in the first three countries, and on behalf of the associations of authors and publishers in Germany. I will share with you these results, as has been presented last year by FEP's Deputy Director, Enrico Turin. The first main figures are the following ones. Taking 100 people in each nation as library users, in Sweden, 60% of these borrow only printed books or CDs, 90.2% only ebooks and digital audiobooks, 20.9% both printed books or CDs, as well as ebooks and audiobooks. In the case of Italy, users of physical media, printed books and CDs, rise to 72.7%, 15.6% for only digital, and 11.7% for both. Lastly, in France, almost 77% borrow only physical media, 11% only digital media, and 12% both media. Particularly in Sweden, a country where ebook lending is much more advanced, digital lending has a very high user share. But who are these users? If we compare average income and education of the population with that of e-lending users, GfK shows that those who borrow books and audiobooks in digital format are on average more educated and wealthier than average population. This data conflicts with the idea that libraries are mainly for encouraging reading among groups of the population that would not otherwise have access to books. In Sweden, for example, 32% of the population has an income of over 4,000 euros, and 37% of e-lending users. In France, 14% against 15%, and in Italy, 8% against 9%. If half of the Italian population has an income of below 2,000 euro, for e-lending users, the percentage drops to 46%. Similar data is found on educational level. A separate inquiry, lastly, poses the question of the risk of market cannibalization due to e-lending. If we ask the readers how it has influenced the purchase of printed books and CDs on the one hand, and digital books or audiobooks on the other, the results show that in the case of Sweden, 45% of users no longer buy or buy fewer physical books than before, while 30% does no longer buy or buy fewer digital books than before. Corresponding proportions for France are 36% physical books and 20% for digital books. For Italy, 37% and 18% respectively, and for Germany, 45% and 46%. The fact should be underlined that in Sweden, 16% of respondents have never bought ebooks. In France, only 13%, and in Italy, 3%. A figure which might be the consequence of the early e-lending service implementation in Sweden, and some people never felt the need to actually buy ebooks because library services were good and present since the very beginning. In Germany, the percentage of those who buy fewer print books due to e-lending is even higher than the corresponding percentage of ebooks and digital audiobooks, which leads to the idea that the replacement effect takes place with the spread of e-lending. This is a great concern among German publishers and authors, and is the reason why they are cooperating to make that e-lending service are beneficial to everyone. Taking into account all the above remarks, the main conclusions from the results of this study are that the e-lending is prevalent, especially among the high-income and highly educated groups of the population, and has a significantly negative impact on the purchase purchasing not only of ebooks, but of printed books in particular. It is obvious that we should be extremely careful in finding the right balance between protecting copyright and safeguarding the creation of new, talented, and high-quality cultural and scientific works, on the other hand, serving the public policy goal of enabling access to these cultural goods to the wide population, and especially to those who do not have the resources to pay for having access. And libraries are entrusted to fulfill this so important goal. However, it is the responsibility of the state to provide the means for fulfilling these public policy goals, and this is totally unjustified to expect that rights holders should bear the relevant costs. And let me assure you that authors and publishers in Greece have already adopted and included in all their petitions to the government, as first one, the significant increase of the public library's budget and the adoption of a public policy on reading, which has in its center schools and public libraries. In most of the European Union states, the prevailing models of e-lending is that which is based on licensing agreements between authors, publishers, and libraries. And this is also the model that is followed in Greece, even in a small scale, but by the National Greek Library. And I may pay tribute to the former inspired and knowledgeable director of the National Library, the late Philippos Tsiboglou, who envisioned the electronic reading room of the National Library and introduced e-lending in Greece in cooperation with Greek publishers and within the framework of licensing agreements. I am sure that the representative of the National Library will give some more insight of this project. But I would like also Anne to add some comments, especially from the experience of e-lending in other countries and the cooperation of publishers and libraries, and also, yes, okay, and maybe to react on what we have heard, especially from Jennie's presentation, which was quite one-sided, I would say. But but let's. Do you want to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Zánnos, for your comments, for your introduction. Let me invite Mrs. Anne Berkman, the director of the Federation of European Publishers, to deliver us her comments, her thoughts.
Thank you for the impromptu invitation to say a few words. Obviously, this is a very hot topic in Europe and a topic that will keep us busy for the coming years. I think that we all have a common interest, is that as many people read. I would say first, and as a matter of clarification, I don't think that digital literacy is so much about just reading. It's about using the internet. So I think literacy is also very well served, if not better, by printed works. But that's a different matter. I would say in Europe we have a series of law and a series of case law that define the topic. The first one was the decision on the Dutch library decision, which clearly said that if libraries were able to loan e-book copies that were provided by publisher, it would have to be done in a very secure way and with potential additional conditions for the publisher so that the commercial exploitation can be guaranteed. It is really important that we are able to exploit on behalf of the publisher, on behalf of the authors, the work. I also want to make a small distinction here because I think there's a confusion. There's a lot of talk about scientific publication and trade publication, and those are totally different market. And clearly, when one talks about e-lending, in this context, this is about trade publication. Publication you can find in bookshops, and that in the best case scenario in Europe, we rely on 95% of the revenues come from individual sales. I think in Greece, and this is why I cannot agree more with George than what he says, that the need is to impose to the states to better fund the libraries. And this is something that both the authors and the publishers can support, because my understanding is that in Greece it's less than 1% of the revenue of trade publishing, and so therefore trade authors too come from acquisition by libraries, because the libraries are underfunded. So this should be our first fight, the fight we have to make together. So going back on the European legislation, there's also a lot of confusion that in what I heard about this idea of controlled digital lending. Controlled digital lending, first of all, it is being challenged in the United States, and we have had a first decision in favor of authors and publishers telling that this is not a fair use in none of the 4 factors of fair use. And in Europe, we have had 2 decisions. One, which is a rather old decision, that says that if you can make indeed a digital copy for preservation, you can only use it within the premises of the library, because if this makes sense, it doesn't make sense to lend it outside. And the second one is a decision called Tom Cabinet. It's also a Dutch decision. Definitely the Dutch were asking a lot of questions to the European Court of Justice, that says that there's no exhaustion to the with digital works. So if you buy a digital book, you buy it for yourself. You can obviously let your family read it, etc. But this is, you cannot resell it. This is it's the same thing for movies. It's the same thing for music, etc. So I think there's a few clarification. I think that it would benefit us all if we were to start to discuss on the actual basis of the legislation. And I think the event being in Greece, although we all speak English, I think that it's really important that this is that we are looking at the European legislation and the European opportunities for Greece as for the other member states, and not at what could happen in other territories that are quite different. So I mean, just to conclude, because I think I just pumped it in the discussion, but I mean, publishers are not against library, to the opposite. I mean, we all are children of libraries. We all benefited from the services of library. What we are just saying is, let's find a right balance between the commercial exploitation of works, which allow us to publish new works and authors to publish new books, and access to those works via both bookseller and librarians. And if we find a balance, and the balance is best found with experiment rather than trying to change the law, and then the law is fixed for many years, and maybe it's not fully implemented. Like, you know, in Greece, there's still no remuneration for public lending right, and this has been over 30 years now. 30 years we have a European legislation, and it's still not fully implemented. So the limitation is implemented, but not the compensation. So licenses will allow us to have a more flexible way. We can adapt it. If we don't see the impact, then we will make it. We will adapt the licenses. But the law, for the moment, it's completely premature. Thank you so much for your attention, and I give you back, George.
Thank you very much.
And if you allow me to add one comment, is that I think that it was already has been mentioned, but I would like also enforce it, that the case of out-of-commerce works is a different story, and I think that this is a field where libraries have a much more important role to and facilitate the access to out-of-print works, because this is a real case where the population has no access because they are not in the commerce. So even and there is a legislation, and we have transposed the 1719 directive, which facilitates the digitization and communication to the public of out-of-commerce works. And this is a field that we could have a very fruitful cooperation.
Thank you very much. Θέλω να πω έτσι, ουσιαστικά τώρα έχουμε τελειώσει τις βασικές εισηγήσεις και θα περάσουμε στη συζήτηση. Ήθελα να πω ότι είδαμε κάποια μοντέλα, βέβαια ο κύριος Vitiello ήταν πολύ χρήσιμος γιατί μας παρουσίασε το τι πραγματικά συμβαίνει σε διάφορες χώρες της Ευρώπης. Η Ελλάδα έχει μία μεγάλη ανάγκη και ένα μεγάλο μειονέκτημα. Η μεγάλη ανάγκη είναι ότι τουλάχιστον όσον αφορά την έρευνα και την ακαδημαϊκή ζωή, δηλαδή την έρευνα και τη διδασκαλία, της λείπει το ελληνικό περιεχόμενο αν εξαιρέσει κανείς τον κάλυπο, τελεία. Γιατί και η συλλογή της Εθνικής Βιβλιοθήκης δεν είναι μόνο ερευνητική, αυτή που δανείζει. Ωστόσο, υπάρχει ένα μεγάλο πρόβλημα που είναι ο αριθμός που ομιλούν την ελληνική γλώσσα. Ξέρετε ότι στην περίοδο του COVID οι ακαδημαϊκές βιβλιοθήκες εξυπηρέτησαν τους αναγνώστες τους, που ο Elsevier και ο Springer και οι άλλοι μεγάλοι εκδότες, IEEE κλπ. Άνοιξαν δωρεάν τις βάσεις τους και τα βιβλία τους και τα πρακτικά συνεδρίων και τα περιοδικά τους σε όλους τους επιστήμονες σε όλο τον κόσμο, και με αυτόν τον τρόπο επωφελήθηκαν και οι δικοί μας ερευνητές που ως μέλη του ΣΕΑΒ. Όμως, όπως είπε και η κυρία και η Jennie από το Library Futures, οι εκδότες αυτοί έχουν εισπράξει 2 και 3 φορές ουσιαστικά την αμοιβή, κέρδη και ωφέλη από την δημοσίευση των ερευνητών όλου του κόσμου. Δηλαδή είναι μια άλλη κατάσταση εκεί που δεν μπορεί να συγκριθεί με τους Έλληνες εκδότες. Είναι λοιπόν αυτά τα δύο προβλήματα, ότι αφενός η ελληνική γλώσσα μιλιέται πάρα πολύ λίγο, άρα και οι πελάτες, ας πούμε, του ελληνικού περιεχομένου είναι πολύ λίγοι σε όλο τον κόσμο, ακόμα και στην Ελλάδα. Αλλά το δεύτερο είναι ότι αναγκαζόμαστε να εξυπηρετούμαστε από το εξωτερικό. Η Ένωση δεν έχει πρόταση, απλώς προσπαθούμε να σκεφτούμε όλοι μαζί ποιο θα ήταν μια καλή λύση ή ένα συμφέρον επιχειρηματικό μοντέλο για όλους και για τους εκδότες, γιατί δεν θέλουμε να κλείσουν οι εκδότες, οι Έλληνες, και να ζούμε από τους ξένους, το αντίθετο μάλιστα. Και ποιο θα ήταν το καλύτερο και για τους αναγνώστες και για τις βιβλιοθήκες, και μπορεί το καλύτερο τελικά να αποδειχτεί ότι είναι το να μην έχουμε ηλεκτρονικά βιβλία, αλλά ας ανοίξει ο διάλογος. Αυτή είναι η δική μας θέση. Το να δούμε σιγά σιγά πώς μπορούν να συμβούν τα πράγματα και ποια θα πρέπει να είναι η στάση μας ή τι πρέπει να συμβεί. Θα ακούσουμε τώρα...
Ανθή, if I may say, I think George Andreas Zánnos mentioned the National Library as a good example how we can actually having
όμως επειδή τώρα η Εθνική Βιβλιοθήκη είναι σε μια κατάσταση...
As we said, it's something different.
Η Εθνική όμως δεν μπορούσε να είναι εδώ.
As a country that we have say some hundreds organized libraries with low budget, and the publishing houses are not say some thousands as in other European countries, and we have so many problems in budgeting, say even services in libraries. We might to find a sustainable way of incorporate the digital lending to our public libraries. So one way is, say, the National Library to take the initiative. Philippos Tsiboglou had this good idea, implemented, but maybe they didn't have the resources to further these services and add more, say, books in that. But we need, say, a big organization, and in my mind is the National Library of Greece, to come to, say, in an agreement with publishers, maybe ΟΣΔΕΛ, and establish, create a platform that it can secure the e-books and lend them free to the public. So every single public library can have access to the National Library, but actually getting the e-books. That's an idea, of course. Expand this idea of Philippos to and the users get these books from the National Library. Of course, there are other issues. How many times someone can download the book, read a book, for how long, etc. But that's, I think, it's details if we agree to a certain way of working. So
να περάσουμε.
To the rest. Thank you.
Δυστυχώς η Εθνική Βιβλιοθήκη, αν και προσκλήθηκε, δεν μπορούσε να είναι εδώ, γιατί τώρα βρίσκεται σε μια μεταβατική φάση.
In English, I think.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Because nobody else would understand.
Okay, the National Library is in a difficult period now and didn't manage to join us. So let's ask from Mr. Dαρδανός to introduce himself and to take the step.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Κατσιρίκου. Thanks everybody who joined us today in this from Thessaloniki or from other places around the world. I am a book publisher, both in academic publishing and in retail, let's say, publishing. I'm differentiating those two sectors of publishing in Greece because there are two separate markets. It's the academic market is a state market. We have a constitution, the Greek constitution supports free education for all Greeks in all grades of education, from kindergarten up to higher education. So textbooks are given for free to the students in extremely low prices, lower than photocopying prices. That's it's so an average student gets his degree, let's say, with 800 euros or 1,000 euros for all the textbooks in all 4 or 5 years of his. And we're talking about all the textbooks that are getting published from the States, from MIT Press, from Harvard, from Oxford University Press, from Cambridge. This market has a provision that all the best textbooks around the world are translated, so the Greek students have nothing they are no less educated in terms of textbooks and in terms of terminology, which are translated in Greek language than all other students in the US. So the best textbooks are that published in US or UK or Germany or everywhere else is translated in Greece because of this market. And I'm saying this market is really crucial to understand, the public market, because we see what happened in the retail market of textbooks in the US or UK lots of the publishing sector has lost about 80% of the jobs in the printed sector because of the piracy websites, LibGen and Z Library, and all these piracy gave access to the students to download all the textbooks for free, and so thousands of jobs lost in the US. People who went to Frankfurt can say that conglomerates, huge publishing houses now, they have just one small table. So copyright infringement, it's a huge matter, because as publishers and you librarians, we're one environment. We work for each other and we support each other. With no books, there's no libraries and no librarians. With no new books coming, there's no librarians to have new books. So if we don't have a protection environment, which is the Greek constitution, supports the market, then we won't have any motive to publish any book at all. The question which arises is how the foreign publishers, what's their motive? Their motive is that they're selling in English. That means a book is sold in a library price copy, which is, you can find the book 80 pages, 200 euros. Library price, sold in 1,000 libraries, 2-3 copies per library. We have permissions for ebook lending or ebook sold per student in universities. So the publishers have their income from a closed niche market. University textbook market shouldn't be a free market, never was a free market. It's a market, protected market, either by library budgets around the world, institution budgets in Greece, but we have no library culture. Unfortunately, we do not have a library culture. We do not have libraries in schools. We do not have school libraries at all. We have some shelves, that's it. We don't have school libraries that support the students to research from the beginning of their school years. So we have only one book per lesson in schools. So the children don't go to the mentality of searching, of reading 2 or 3 or 4 different books. So libraries in Greece is an alien thing. We should note that. Librarians are aliens to the Greeks. In all other Western countries, librarians is part of the culture. So we should support libraries become part of the Greek culture, as is in other countries. So this is a small introduction to some things that we said. When we talked about public lending, we talk about only legally bought ebooks. This is from the European Court, and only 1 copy per user can be lended. In public lending of ebooks is the same thing as we say use of ebooks, and pirate use in Greece it's a major issue. Lots of books are used, downloaded from pirated websites in English. So we need, there's a great need of a good lending system, as Mr. Garoufalu just previously said. But we have the example of Canada, which 10 years ago we had the Canadian flu. It's a term in publishing, where the use of a small portion of a book in use in the library turned in an 80% loss of revenue of royalties in authors. So the majority of university publishers in Canada closed, and the rest changed the subject of publishing. They published different books. In Canadian flu, it's a case you can search in Canada, where the mentality of copyright is much higher than Greece. In Greece, we have a very poor understanding of copyright protection in universities, very poor understanding, and we should take care of that. Mr. Garoufalu just mentioned the public lending program of the National Library. Unfortunately, those books that were public lended are now on torrents, pirated. Unfortunately, we cannot assure, don't have an assurance, but lending our textbooks won't have the same problem. And then let's go to another. Mr. Zánnos said about that. There is, you should know ARFIS, academic reading format research, which is a conglomerate of librarians. Mrs. Mizrachi from UCLA is on top of this. Diane Mizrachi, UCLA librarian, with Jumana Boustani from Université Gustave Eiffel in France, and with Alicia Salaj, librarian in University of Oregon, and other librarians. ARFIS is a team of librarians that every year they make a survey in 33 countries what students, undergraduate students, prefer: printed reading or screen reading, both in articles and textbooks. Before COVID, the percentage of printing preference was 80%, 80. They couldn't read ebooks because they couldn't concentrate, they couldn't remember, and their eyes were hurting after some hours. So what is the purpose of boosting, of promoting in undergraduate students? I noticed that ebook or e-public lending, there should be a good public lending, but there's no reason of boosting, of promoting e-reading, because students don't prefer e-reading. At the same time, we have the top scientist, Susan Greenfield, a neuroscientist from the UK, and Naomi Varone, top linguistic from Washington University, that said that e-reading is not good for the brain. It makes damage to the brain. The brain does not develop, medically, does not develop when it's addicted to the screen. Maybe in 1-2 generations, in some years, students get adopted to reading from screen. But nowadays, data are not that we should move to the screen totally. Who can read from screen? It's okay, but it's not something that the majority prefers. And science, it says it's not good to have the children and the students get addicted to the screen. Everybody is addicted to our phones. Why make more addiction? But for the researcher and the PhD researcher, e-lending and e-books, it's absolutely good and something that you can search from. You can find all the information you need. You need to have a good database of e-lending or e-books for the researcher. And then finally, I want to mention the danger of book as an entity, not only e-books or printed book, but book as an entity from artificial intelligence. I mentioned it yesterday, I mentioned it today. Chegg, which is a major distributor of lending textbooks, both physically and e-book in the US to students, lending textbook to students, has a drop of 48% in the shares in the stock exchange, because they reported that the students prefer to speak to the chat, to the bot, rather than explore the database, their platform, and find information from the books. So they moved to their chatbot, which makes it's very student oriented and gives information especially for the same students, this specific student. So this could replace teachers, could replace librarians in some percentage or in some form. is something that we just heard from the guy who left Google, the godfather of AI, said that the bot is more smarter than a human, like human is from frog. If this is true, then it's really scary for the future of librarians, of education, of book publishing in general. And finally, as a publisher and as a person, we don't want public lending to be a burden of the librarians. We want public lending to be obligation of the central government, not of library budget. The Greek governments tend to push all the spending from the central government to the universities and librarians. We disagree with that. We need to support public education in Greece. It's a matter of freedom. It's a matter of democracy. It's a matter of we need to upgrade it. We need more money for books, more money for libraries, but cost of lending should be a matter of central government, not of library budget. Thank you for listening to me. I can answer to questions, whoever wants any to discuss. I'm pleased to listen to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dαρδανός. It was an holistic view. There are a lot of items to be discussed, perhaps not now, not today, but we have opened the agenda in a European, at least, level. Mr. Kalamaras, Michałys Kalamaras, is the founder of e-reader, e-αναγνώστης in Greece. Your step is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am the founder of a website for readers and professionals, e-αναγνώστης, which stands for e-reader. And first of all, I am obviously an advocate of reading digitally, because to begin with, and in my view, it is a bit naive to believe that that people will put down their screens in any way, shape, or form. So we made make sure that books have a place in our screens. And I think in that respect, both the publishers, the bookstores, and the libraries have an important role to play. Obviously, this is important for trade publishing, this is important for educational publishing, and this is important for academic publishing, which is three quite different fields. So just to, my opening salvo, let's say. But apart from that, the problem is, and this is quite tightly connected to the e-lending issue, that ΟΣΔΕΛ, for example, funded and presented a survey important on reading habits and the reading audience in Greece. Many things were interesting in it, but the main issue of concern for me was that actually reading still remains, even in developed Western, whatever you want to call it, societies, mostly middle-class habit. And we are not just talking about reading, for practical or professional purposes. We are also talking as reading as a means to entertainment and so on. So this is the challenge. The challenge is that we need to broaden the audience. We need to bring reading to more and more people, and many people are excluded from reading. And I think in that respect, it is important when speaking of digital to involve the libraries. And to begin with, this is not just a matter of involvement in a general sense. We need to make available ebooks and audiobooks through a lending system. I'm starting from this because sometimes I think even this is, challenged in a way. And I am very well aware of the Federation of European Publishers surveys. I have the chance to with many of the publishers to discuss their findings, and definitely I think we need to find a solution. I'm not going to go, of course, into the details. I'm sure the stakeholders were able to negotiate them, but I think in principle, every ebook in some way should be available for lending at some point, maybe through some windowing and so on. The thing is, of course, and George Andrew Zánnos was quite correct, is that there is a challenge because it seems from the outside that there is no huge difference between a subscription platform for ebooks, which is commercial, and the e-learning system. Also, many of the people today, then that's a result of doing platforms, and especially subscription platforms, also turn to the backlist. So it's not probably enough to say it like this, that an older book is necessarily less valuable for a publisher. It always has been the case, but I think since the pandemic this is more prominent. But in any way, I think what we are living now is, I would say, an e-learning crisis, and this is a result of the pandemic. I mean, what happened in the pandemic was that I believe the libraries were empowered exactly because their service was so vital at the moment. A lot of content by the publishers was offered for free, and obviously the libraries want to capitalize on that, and I think it makes sense for them. And the publishers, in a way, you need to have now a more tight, let's say, position. But my view is that we should know that, for example, in ebooks, now it's not the main focus of the industry. We know audiobooks is the hot thing. We all know that, with double-digit growth and so on. But I think it is important to pay attention to that too. And in that sense, I believe that it is difficult to strike a balance. I understand that, but I believe it is also really problematic that, especially in the US, we are seeing legal action against the libraries. And in that respect, I think KR21, I have followed many of their workshops, and it is an important advocate, and a solution has to be reached. And a final comment, because this is a book fair, so it is a fast-paced event, and we have to move. The main thing I believe still for most publishers, the main challenge for most publishers is that although the official position may be one of supporting digital, but many actually are still quite hesitant in engaging really in digital, and also they are not that open to understand what this means for their job. I mean, probably digital, yes, will challenge at some point the current copyright status, but it's not something that we can avoid. So we have to respect intellectual property, but at the same time provide the wider possible access to the public. I cannot solve the problem, of course, but I'm just in principle saying some, let's say, parameters for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kalamaras. And our last but not least speaker today is Panagiotis Κάπος, a publisher.
Let's move to another publisher, to Panagiotis Κάπος. Panagiotis, can you introduce yourself and make a comment, or you can sum up some of what we said up to now?
Thank you very much for your invitation. It's a very important event today. I would like to thank you all, the organizers, for this, because this event involves the participation of many different actors in the field, and this is very important. As a publisher of a small-sized trade publishing house in Greece, and mainly as a PhD researcher in the book publishing industry and an academic at Pantheon University, teaching courses referring to book as a medium in digital era and book publishing business, I have to examine the book ecosystem, the internal and external environment of publishing, with the aim of understanding the position of publishing houses and the position for all the stakeholders as well. And of course, to see where are the challenges and the prospects of the publishing industry in this hybrid environment, analog and the digital environment that we are all participating. So the new publishing ecosystem, with its structural characteristics of networking, interaction, and constant changes, we are all changing roles, relationships, chains, and business models because we have the digital technologies that are forced us to change rapidly. All these characteristics are reformed under the influence of new technological developments, which act as a driving force. We should look at every issue with an holistic perspective, and I think that's the thing that's the perspective that we are all taking part today, is the holistic perspective, because as each new dimension dynamically changes, affects all the actors of the ecosystem. So digital lending is one of these crucial issues. The library lending model is established and supported in the physical world. We all know that. But what is happening in the digital environment? That libraries of different types and publishers with different perspectives and models continue to face many challenges. So the pandemic gave a new impetus to digital lending, as libraries were called upon to meet the new demands for ebooks. E-lending increased scientifically, while publishers' ebook sales increased at the same time. So we saw that in this historical moment, both publishers and, of course, libraries gave new impetus to the digital format. Yet, even publishers, book publishers who have a mostly positive relationship with the libraries are skeptical, and we are all skeptical about this, because after all, publishers are for-profit businesses, while libraries are community institutions meant to serve their readers for free. So this creates creates a pressure and different perspectives between the two sides. Of course, we mentioned before in Greece, with all of these previous speakers told, that we have a lot of things to face regarding to the digital era and the digital lending. We have the recent example of the electronic reading room from National Library of Greece, which aims to promote the electronic reading and familiarize the reading public with electronic books. The service is offered free for charge to certified users who have the opportunity to browse a collection of Greek language electronic titles and read books of their choice. Because I think that we don't have a lot of time right now, I won't be very detailed to all these issues. The usage model is now configured as follows. It has 5 simultaneous users per title, 3 books per user, up to 15 days. The usage is up to 15 days, and also is 1 renewal of use for an additional 15 days. The reservation of 1 title already in use, and there are 36 users per year. So this is the users model for the electronic reading room from National Library of Greece. Of course, sustainable business and the lending models is a topic that we keep us busy, and also the protection of the copyright and the intellectual property has to be the top priority in order every business model to be sustainable. As long as there is a fair model for everyone, I suppose digital lending will have a sustainable future. In this light, I don't think digital lending will cause a big blow to book sales. And on the other hand, digital lending cuts across space-time boundaries and gives access to content to any reader wherever they want it. Of course, I believe also as a publisher and as a researcher that there is no one-size-fits-all model. Every model depends on the size of the market, the trade or academic publishing approach, the structure of every library, the degree of acceptance of the ebook in every country, etc. We have see a lot of different models in US and in UK mainly, and also in Europe. Also, of course, for Greece, we have to try to find out which is the more suitable lending model. And of course, all these things that Mr. Dardano said and Mr. Zánnos about the protection and the illegal downloading, the piracy, of course, is our main issue in order a model to be sustainable. But I believe that authors, publishers, and libraries are the pillars of knowledge and freedom, and they should find sustainable ways to continue their crucial role in turbulent times. We have faced a lot of political, social, economical, and of course technological challenges right now. For example, the streaming services in the book publishing industry, artificial intelligence, the blockchain technologies. These technologies are gonna change the paradigm of book publishing and of course lending and creating of course books. So in a constantly challenging environment, the saying of Heraclitus that everything changes must be the guide of the global ecosystem. So I believe in order to conclude and to sum it up, we have open an agenda. The agenda is it has a lot of perspectives, and also there are a lot of challenges that we have to face. I believe that maybe, of course, the organizers and can, of course, with all the other stakeholders and the libraries and the book publishers have to sit in a round table and exchange their ideas with honest dialogue, and because the purpose is common. I believe the purpose is common. So we don't have anything to separate between each other. We serve books, we serve the freedom of speech, we serve the knowledge, the ideas, everything that makes us to be human. So thank you very much for your attendance. I think that in every other case we can speak more technical or more in detail for all these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Panagiotis. Actually, the agenda is open now. Association of Greek Librarians proposed to investigate the paradigms from other countries that their language is spoken from so few people like Greek, and if you agree, you can arrange a meeting with other countries' associations of publishers and libraries, perhaps, such as the Netherlands, the Estonian. There are a lot of countries beyond the Anglo-Saxon and French and German natives who speak this, and Spanish and Portuguese. These are the languages, I think, that are spoken more in the world. and Chinese, of course. So we could investigate which is their ideas and their good practice, perhaps. If you agree, we can arrange it. And after this discussion, beyond this meeting, this is a...
I think all our participants today are open to continue this dialogue, this agenda. It's up to us to continue this discussion.
Okay. Is there any person who like to make a comment now in the end? Matt? Mr. Zánnos, of course, the step is yours.
I just wanted, I don't have anything else to add. Just I wanted to express my consent to your suggestion to continue the discussion and also to have examples of other countries as well. So I'd like to thank you sincerely for this opportunity to discuss. And I'm sure that jointly we can find the right balance and serve the interests of all sides. And this is what we should pursue.
We hope so. Because we are strongly hyper the Greek content, the Greek language, the Greek publishers, the Greek authors, the Greek thought, the Greek kind of living. We can't repeat other models for ourselves. So we must insist to create our model, and that's our authors. So, Matt.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's been a wonderful, wide-ranging discussion, and there's been a lot that's definitely a lot that's been said, and I think those threads should be picked up on as we continue. And that, you know, to go back to kind of the start of the classics, the kind of start of copyright law in 1709 with the Statute of Anne, there's always been an aspect that's been about profit and rights control, and there's also been an aspect about public access. And I think continuing that in the digital era is what we're all trying to do, even if we may disagree about the particular terms. But I think that that's continuing that conversation is how we work it out. So thank you all. And do get in touch with me if you want to chat about anything.
IFLA has published principles for library lending, actually. If you agree, I can share it to our panel after. Matt, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
If you agree, I can share.
Share. Oh, yes. Do sorry there. Yes, do do share my email. I'm happy to be in touch with anyone. So
Okay.
that's all public.
Thank you very much.
That's what I'm here for.
Another person who likes to recommend everything here now before leaving? Manolis?
Yes. Until let's sum up. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Can you hear me? Okay, let's sum up.
Very good. Very well.
What we achieved today is to open the dialogue between different stakeholders, different partners, that we all understand that actually we serve and we are working in the same goals. We don't have anything to actually, we have only a common aim to achieve, make sort of available the online books with various ways to the public. For us as librarians, we believe that through the libraries, we mentioned to a good practice that we have in Greece, from the National Library, even though publishers, they believe that it has to be more stable, more well-designed in order to protect their their rights. We have ОΣΔΕΛ that it's open to conversation, it's open to the dialogue, which is super for me. And we have small and big publishers and consultants that they have, and we have the European actually a voice here that they say, okay, we can work together in order, in a small country like Greece, with, as Kostas mentioned, Dardano's, with low budget to the libraries, we can achieve lending e-books to the public, but we have to follow the European law. I mean, nobody wants to do something without following the law. Librarians actually protecting all this. That's our aim, our mission. So let's say that we're not going to meet next year in the 2024 in the same place, but we can maybe renew our sort of next event before the book fair in Thessaloniki after a year. So as a head of the department in the fourth biggest university in Greece, the university, the Hellenic University here in Thessaloniki, and as a head of the library science, archives and information systems department, I can say here yes to any initiative that you are starting, and happy to work and happy to spread the word about copyrights and copyright law and e-learning, not only to our students, but to the professionals as well, so we can work together. So thank you very much. And see you very, very soon. Thanks to everybody that participated and to our guests for taking the lead to present their beliefs. So thank you very much, and let's meet again very soon.
Thank you very much also from the Association of Greek Librarians and Information Scientists. In the chat, I added the link for IFLA principles for library e-lending. Please don't forget to find the documents at the Eblida website when that Mr. Vitiello recommended us. I think that these investigations were very interesting. Because they cover the whole European library. So we have also to compare the attitudes of every country. And we promise to meet you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Παναγιώτη, μείνε να σου πω κάτι.
Thank you very much.